Welcome to Shadows of the Past, where we shine our light on the shadows of history. Imagine that you've laid down for a night's rest, and you're in one hell of a deep sleep, but then you're woken up in a crash of noise and light. Soon you feel a sweltering heat as you notice that your bed has erupted in flames. You walk over the broken glass from the cocktail that was thrown through your window, slicing your feet. As you cough down the smoke, quickly filling up your house, you scatter to try and get outside. You stumble in the dark as an eruption of heat rises behind you. Scrambling with the knob, you manage to get it open, and soon the mercy of the cool air hits you. But then again, so does the bullet, and everything goes black. This is the unfortunate end to Edmundo Aguilar, one of the many lives cut short by a violent sect of the Latter-day Saints known as the Church of the Firstborn of the Lamb of God. They would bring back old, brutal practices so the populace can know the true wrath of God, and also the duplicitous nature of the human condition. From a brother's quarrel to actions immoral, let's delve into the shadows. Today's story begins with two brothers, Ervil and Joel Lebaron, and this takes place in Chihuahua, Mexico. No, wait, not that one. There we go. Their father, Oma, had moved his family of Latter-day Saints from California. This was to continue practicing polygamy, as it was outlawed by the church in 1890. Realizing that Mexican authorities didn't really have an interest in prosecuting polygamists, they decided to set up permanent residence. Alma, before dying, instilled a messianic complex within his children. You know, as you do. They believed they were the prophets sent to save the Latter-day Saints from their spiritual bondage and would hold authority over all the earthly kingdoms. Which I'm really not sure why you'd want that job. It honestly sounds like a lot. But it was after Alma's death in 1951 that Joel decided to go back to Utah. This was to establish his own Mormon fundamentalist church. It was known as a Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times. Yeah, a mouthful. It's in reference to an Ephesians passage that is over Jesus' governance over heaven and earth. Joel then used his own authority in order to bring his church back to Mexico. Most of the Lebaron family members soon followed. His brother Ervil would become second in command and also get his own second settlement. They would even include their little brother by giving him a high rank in office, and the good times would not last long. Around 1967, tension between Joel and Ervil began rising. Ervil had wanted to take their second colony in Los Molinos and turn it into a beach-style resort. Joel, on the other hand, sought to use the land as a place for future recruits. But the biggest disagreement came in Ervil's belief that they should bring back the old custom of blood atonement. Oh, and what's that, you ask? Just the totally insane balls belief that Jesus dying on the cross did not save all the sinners. And so, in order to be able to enter the kingdom of heaven, the sinner would have to die to atone for those sins. This would allow Ervil to mark for death anyone that he felt had committed crimes against the church. Joel, more focused on the economic strife and survival of his family, and decidedly less crazy, refused to allow this practice. And this only continued to incite Ervil until he actively began preaching against his brother. Joel had turned his back on the true church, so Ervil was gonna make his own, and he was gonna call it the Church of the Firstborn of the Lamb of God. These brothers was with these brothers and these loquacious ass names. This name in reference to those who followed the supreme prophet to the highest level of heaven. And who's that prophet? Well, Ervil, of course. And some of Joel's followers seem to also believe this, drawn by Ervil's natural charisma and religious knowledge. They soon switched allegiances to Ervil's new church. By 1972, Ervil had had enough. He published booklets accusing Joel of capital crimes, and would eventually be the intellectual author of Joel's death. Within his home, Joel would be savagely beaten with a chair and shot several times. Daniel B. Jordan, one of Ervil's followers and co-author of one of his books, was arrested for the crime but was soon released, as every witness had been too terror-stricken to testify. Ervil was also arrested for planning the murder but was set free a year later by the court. And even though Joel's followers did not flock to Ervil, he still earnestly believed that he was the one mighty and strong, and produced many booklets and pamphlets stating the same. He would be the one who decides who dies. And that next person? That would be his brother Vernal. Vernal was made the new head of Joel's fellowship, and we all know how Ervil feels about competition. Vernal was very aware of how bloodthirsty his brother was and soon went into hiding. Under the belief that Vernal was in Las Molinas, Ervil sent 3 of his followers to raid the town and draw him out, including one of his underage wives. Yeah. So I know you're gonna ask, well, Michael, how did they do that? And I'd say, who are you? I don't even know you. And after our awkward excursion, I'd tell you that these crazy bastards, they use firebombs. They would drive around and set ablaze many buildings within the town. Whenever one of the residents would go outside to try and quench the pyre, the raiders would open fire with guns drawn. This is how they would kill Marón Mendez, a 16-year-old that was trying to put out a fire while on his roof, and he would receive a deadly shotgun blast for his efforts. Edmundo Aguilar would also receive a similar fate, as he was shot dead trying to escape his burning home after being woken up from his sleep. No more would die, but 13 would be injured in the destruction. Unfortunately, these idiots were working under false pretenses. Vernal had swiftly moved his families to Nicaragua and was nowhere near Las Molinas at the time of the raid. So much suffering for nothing. Ervil was again arrested for being the mastermind behind the attack, but was released due to insufficient evidence. So yeah, that sucks. The violence would only continue. Noemi Zarate, the mother-in-law of one of Ervil's brides, had reached her limit with the violence. She threatened to spill it all to the police. And Ervil's answer is to have one of his wives drive her out to the barren desert. Noemi's body was never recovered, and to this day still lies lost amongst the dunes. In 1975, the next marked for blood atonement was another polygamous leader. His name was Robert Simons. Ervil wanted to marry one of his wives, but as we've learned, these guys don't exactly like sharing. Robert denounced Ervil, and so Robert had to go. He was driven to a remote location where 2 others were waiting on him. They tiptoed up behind him and discharged a shotgun point blank into his back. He was soon doused in lime and then buried. The driver would eventually lead the police to a body, but would die before the gun-toting member would see trial. And so the gunman was acquitted of the charges. So yeah, everything's seeming pretty fucked. And in the same year, another member, Dean Vest, met his unfortunate end when he tried to leave the church. Already in hot water for not selling his boat and donating half to the church, he would need atonement. Ervil had his most vicious wife, Vonda, carry out the orders. She had asked Dean to freshen up, and while he was washing his hands, Vonda came from behind with a .38 and shot him 3 times. This was all so she could have her eternal place in heaven. Or so she was told. But her place to be was prison, relayed with her coming conviction. 2 years later, Ervil would issue an order so vile that would commemorate his trophy as worst dad of all time. His pregnant teenage daughter was marked for blood atonement. Yeah. She had been kept separate from her toddler and was going to go to the police in retaliation. She was put into a car by 2 of the members involved in previous atonements. She was driven around and slowly died, gasping for air, as she was slowly strangled to death. Her body has also, unfortunately, never been found. There was a witness testimony from a follower, Lloyd, stating that after he had commented on the car sagging, Ervil had casually asked if Rebecca was in the trunk. Lloyd then opened it about 4 inches, and to his grotesque shock and horror, laying there was Rebecca's posthumous body, embraced by the cold hands of death. And there's really not a whole lot else to say about that, besides that these guys are just scum. And none of these deaths had truly satisfied Ervil. I mean, how could any of them? But there was still one atonement that constantly lingered in his mind. He was obsessed. He could not let it go. His brother still had to die. And so a plot was concocted to get 2 birds stoned at the same time. I mean, that's a saying, right? Rulon C. Ulrid was the leader of one of the most well-known polygamous sects of the LDS, known as the Apostolic United Brethren. Oh yeah, it's that one.
This season on Sister Wives.
Do you really want to still have a plural family? Sometimes I can't tell.
Ulrid had refused to pay tithes to Ervil's church, and even worse, refused to acknowledge his authority. So Ervil sent his wife and stepdaughter to make sure Ulrid paid the blood price. The two women drove to Ulrid's Salt Lake City office in the suburbs. They rushed in through the door, pulled their guns, and shot him 6 times in cold blood. And this is where the second part of the plan is executed. Vernal's group had ties to the UAB, and so when he goes to pay his respects to the posthumous Ulrid, his life would be forfeit. Ervil sent 3 members with guns loaded, but Vernal would live another day. For you see, in 1976, when Ervil was still in jail the second time for the raid on Los Molinas, 2 of his wives had written anonymous letters to Jimmy Carter and Billy Graham threatening their lives if Ervil was not released. This, of course, brought the gaze of the Secret Service, who managed to track down the renters of the post office box the letter was sent from. And so they were on full guard for Ulrid's funeral, expecting foul play. Ervil's minions quickly aborted and left after seeing the large police presence. Guess he wasn't exactly too helpless and defenseless for this spineless lot. Then police finally had what they needed in order to connect Ervil to all of these crimes. Somehow, the shooters were acquitted, but Ervil was convicted and finally sent to prison. This is where he would remain until his death in 1981. Until this time, he continued to write testaments of faith and even came out with a list of those to be marked with blood atonement. He would also name his 2 sons next in line to inherit his church. They would also walk in their father's shadow by delivering blood atonement onto more of those who are in disagreement with their authority. They even threw in the added bonus of auto theft. Doing the Lord's work, boys. Ervil would die in that Utah prison. And coincidentally, his brother Vernal would die several days later in a car crash. They would not be the last casualties. As many as 30 murders could have been carried out to kill disobedient church members, all part of the Book of the New Covenants. Written by who? Ervil, of course, again. Even when locked away, his withering touch would still rot those unlucky enough to gain his ire. Ervil's sons would be imprisoned for their own involvement in murders, one dying in a jail cell and one also currently confined. And this is where the hideous swath of needless murders ends, all in the name of a single man's vanity. Like Charles Manson, Ervil loved to use his charisma to get others to do his dirty work. But unlike Charles, he didn't need the drugs. Preying upon people's ignorance and insecurities, Ervil would instill righteous purpose in their lost lives, giving them a secure ticket to heaven while painting a hellscape all around him. And though I'm no theologian, I don't see any passage to the afterlife being gained at the end of a bullet. And I promise that no one's purpose is to be a murder machine. Ervil's story stands as a warning to all of those under the oppressive thumb of a tyrant. If control is the name of the game, usually your interest is not in the forefront. It's not even usually an afterthought. So just please be wary for anything too good to be true. Rarely does anything come without a price. And for those currently suffering, I hope there's an eventual light for you. I also hope that more of the bodies will eventually be recovered and then properly laid to rest. Some final closure to a horrendous legacy. Like Cain from the Bible, Ervil's petty insecurities and gross jealousy left a stain on his family and cursed it all the same. But his name will never live to biblical standards, and the Church of the Firstborn of the Lamb of God remains a tainted institution. He was the true prophet of Ervil. Get it? Thank you for delving into the shadows with me today. Hope your own always remain behind you.